Welcome back to Vitals and Values. We are on episode 2. You ready for this?
Woo!
All right, so our episode today is Stop Being Afraid of Carbs. We're going to talk about insulin resistance and carb confusion. You ready?
I'm scared. Carbs give me anxiety.
Well, that's what I was thinking about this, and I'm like, why? It's interesting that we titled this Stop Being Afraid of Carbs, because why are people afraid of carbs? Like, why do we even talk about it?
Social media. The carnivores, the low carb people, the keto people, all the different diet culture just gets people. Again, diet culture in this whole world loves finding a villain.
What do you think they're actually scared of? Do you think they actually know what they're scared of?
No, they say insulin or whatever.
Well, because I think that is a part of it. I also think people are truly afraid of weight gain.
True.
I don't when I ask my patients what they're eating, I'm like, what's your nutrition like? You know, the first response often is, well, I'm eating low carb. I'm like, I didn't ask you what you weren't eating. I asked you what you are eating. I just think it's interesting that that's people's response.
No, 100%. Because in future episodes, we're actually going to weight stigma. But it's
yes.
the current rhetoric of today, and still has been forever, is freaking carbs make you fat. Carbs are bad for you. They insulin resistance, spiked your blood. There's this woman on social media called the glucose goddess or something, where it's all on. She wears a CGM and basically makes you terrified of your blood sugar hitting 145.
Oh, I didn't even think. Yeah, people were in CGMs. I didn't even think about talking about that in this, but that's a true thing. So,
Cool.
And I know. I mean, I remember when I was in 3rd grade, my mom going on the Atkins diet. It's been around.
It's been around for a minute. So I'm looking forward to this episode and what the science says, and that we can break down context and nuance, and we can kind of go through that, because I went through a whole low carb keto phase myself, and I've done that whole thing, and I can't tell you how many podcast episodes with John and everything we did within Accountable Life Group where that was a constant thing we had to work through, is people just being afraid of carbs.
I think we've all probably gone through some of that, to be honest, but we will get there. So we're going to start with Vitals check. So we're going to talk about science.
Science. What do you got?
So, so simply, what are carbs, right? So it's one of our macronutrients. We have proteins, we have fats, and we have carbs. So that's very simple. Now, what is a carb? It's a molecule that has glucose. And so when we eat food, our body breaks down this carbohydrate into glucose, and it goes into our blood. And that is where we get energy from. So our brain gets a ton of its energy from glucose. That's its preferred energy source. Our muscles get a lot of glucose. They bring in glucose and they store it as glycogen, which is the storage form of glucose. And when it becomes a problem that's when we're talking about insulin resistance. And so now that brings insulin into the picture. So what is insulin? So when you eat food, your body senses through different hormones that, you've eaten carbs. And so your pancreas secretes insulin. And insulin tells the cells in your body that, hey, we need to take in the glucose that is now in the blood. And so it sends out receptors that bring glucose into the cell, because glucose, which is also blood sugar, is when it's floating around in the blood, that glucose isn't doing anything for us. So glucose in the blood is just on its way somewhere else, essentially. And so our cells take up that glucose and they use it for energy. Now it becomes a problem when we hit insulin resistance. So your body does not respond to the insulin secreted by the pancreas like it should. And so your body continues to have more and more glucose in the blood, which is not good for us. And that leads to things like metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease. It leads to type 2 diabetes, obviously. And those are all big risk factors for cardiovascular disease, which is ultimately what we want to avoid. So that is kind of a brief overview of carbs, what they are, and then why or when they become a problem, I would say.
Okay. And then I know inside the hard science basics, there are different types of carbs. And this is where I think it's super important. Not all calories are created equal. And when you not all carbs are created equal, break that down.
Yeah.
There's different types of carbs. How does it all work?
So simple carbs and you have complex carbs. So complex carbs are going to be a lot of your good whole foods. It's going to be your fruits, your vegetables have some carbs in them. It's going to be beans. It's going to be legumes. It's going to be whole grains. So all of those things are complex carbs, and they are, when you eat those things, they have a lot of micronutrients. They have a lot of fiber in them, and so your body, when it responds to when you eat that, your blood sugar does not increase in this spike, which is what happens when you eat simple carbs. So simple carbs are more processed carbs traditionally, and that is going to be your cookies, your breads, your
The good stuff.
yeah, the very tasty things. And so when you eat that, it's very simple for your body to digest, so your blood sugar spikes very quickly. Those are the ones that are going to cause more of the problems.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not that blood sugar spikes are inherently bad. It's how often, how consistently, and how, like, once insulin resistance becomes part of the picture, that's where things like you talk about, like, we can kind of just ad lib off of it in values and focus, but like CGMs and all this kind of stuff. Do you have any hard data, like studies you want to go into when it comes to vitals check on carbs in this whole world?
The one thing that I think wanted to kind of address is the whole like research on weight related or carbs and weight, because like we kind of mentioned at the very beginning, that's a lot of times what people are fearful of. And I know you've looked into a lot of this research yourself. And we talked about it a little bit earlier before we were on mic, but we know from research that it's not necessarily like going low carb or going low fat is not going to, like, one of those is not better than the other for weight loss. But it's if you eat more protein. I mean, you're big on this. So what is this your favorite study?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but let me pull up the PMID, because you know this is how I roll. PMID is it's in the notes.
It is.
Wait for it. That's that one. 30. Where is it? It's right about which one?
The low carb.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. PMID 229-35440. It's one of my favorite randomized control trials, because it was a cross-sectional study too. And so they took the same people and equated calories across the groups and adjusted their protein, carbs, and fats while equating calories. And they took the same people, went to low carb versus low fat. And at the end of the day, after all the study was done, what did they find? They found that there was only one thing that actually led to a discrepancy in fat loss between populations, especially sustainable fat loss, which was protein levels. But when you equated carbs and fat ratios, it was a nothing burger. So like this idea, you have to think about how many carbs and net carbs versus total carbs. We've had plenty of studies done on it. It just doesn't matter. Like, so if you like, I think when we dive into the next section, we talk about context and like where values and focus and the nuance comes into play. People, I know this is a hard one. Some people like a low carb diet. I know you're like, no, that doesn't exist.
Well, I wouldn't say I wouldn't go that far, but I just think that all people like carbs.
Bread's good.
Like, nobody doesn't like them.
Yeah, bread's good.
I think our bodies are like
pancakes,
predisposed to liking carbs. But the other thing that I think is important to address in the vital section too is the fact that, going back to weight loss a little bit, is people, when they lose weight with a low carb diet, they're like, oh my gosh, I lost weight super quickly. And the reason for that is because when you store glucose in your muscles as glycogen, that stores it with water. And so when you lose weight and you break down you take some of that glucose out of that storage form, it also takes out water. So you are losing water weight.
100%. And that's where I go into, like, I love reading the clinical research. And so when you look at study designs and you compare studies across, oftentimes methodology of study design, they're just weighing people on a scale, which that doesn't equate fat versus water versus tissue versus muscle. It's just weight loss. And so any study that comparatively controls for changing in carb ratios, there's going to be less glycogen storages depending on your carb ratios. So there's going to be weight fluctuations, but it doesn't necessarily mean fat fluctuations.
But I think that's what people think.
Oh my gosh, it's like understanding the difference between weight loss and fat loss in a sense of like carbs and how that kind of plays into the mix. That first week or two, I mean, anytime you adjust your nutrition, period, that first week or two, you drop some water weight real quick, and then it's like the whole sequence afterwards. But going into like the values and focus as we kind of create more context and nuance, what are some of the main talking points for you?
On values and focus, I would say that I think that people need to understand that carbs are not the devil. like carbs are not bad. Like carbs are really good for us and they provide us a lot of great benefit. And I think people just have this thing in their mind that I can't touch a carb. And I know I see this all the time. And I think there's just so many benefits to it, from athletic performance to mental clarity to how it helps our gut if we're eating the right kinds. And so I think just learning to not demonize those carbs is super important.
Now, within not demonizing, what is your stance on how do you portray the hierarchy and the importance of carbs? Because it is true. Like the same thing with fat. Like I think we're definitely have to do an episode in the future with the same stigmatisms around fat, because fat doesn't make you fat. Fat is not inherently bad for you. There are certain forms of fat that are better than others, and there's some you need to limit, some you need to promote. So for carb standpoint,
yes.
As you kind of create that hierarchy, how do you do that?
Well, I mean, I think that going back to the simple versus complex is super important, because I think the quality of our carbs really do matter. Now, there's still like the weight of, or the calories per weight is still going to be the same, but there's benefits you're going to get from a carb that go beyond its caloric density. And I think people can't see beyond that. And so I think putting your complex high fiber carbs up top is super important. And then, is that what you kind of mean?
Yeah, and like
okay.
and like getting granular, which ones are those? Do you prefer, like, kind of leaning into
so
that?
Fantastic sources of carbs are going to be your beans. Those are great ones, and people really want to know they should eat more beans.
Yes, lentils, beans and lentils.
Black beans have a ton of fiber and they're super good for you, and we know fiber is great. We should talk more about fiber in a future episode too, but I think focusing on beans and legumes and lentils are amazing, and obviously fruits and vegetables are going to provide some carbs, and I know you're going to laugh
what
at me.
you're saying is vegetables are carbs.
Vegetables have carbs.
Yes, vegetables are carbs. I'm taking it. That's a win.
They are still a lower carb food than our grains and beans and legumes. I did forget to mention grains. So grains are super good. So people are like, bread, I think, is very confusing to people. Like they're like, ooh, carbs, I can't touch bread. But there are better options for bread. And people need to realize too that sourdough bread is fantastic, but it is not, the carbs aren't different. Because people will tell me, oh, I switched to sourdough. I'm like, but is it still white refined grain?
But it's sourdough.
But it's just white refined grains. And so I'm like, well, are you eating whole grain carbs or whole grain bread? That's really what you want to focus on if you want to get a better carb source in your breads.
Now, within context of carbs, insulin resistance, and that whole play, you have a patient that has quote unquote insulin resistance. How, and like they're not, I mean, you can even kind of convey that, like you're going into diabetes, you have type 2 diabetics, you have insulin resistant but not type 2 diabetics, you're talking about carbs. How do you break that down?
I tell people, don't be afraid of them, but please let's talk about which ones we're choosing. And I think, I mean, it depends on the level of somebody, because if someone, like as you said, if they're just insulin resistant, it's going to be a different conversation than someone who's in full-fledged diabetes. And so it is going to be, we're going to individualize this for the person in their current situation. But I think talking with them about that quality of the carb, super important. Increasing fiber is going to help you manage that blood sugar better. And so that's going to be a better option for someone with who's insulin resistant. And then I think knowing what their exercise routine is, because if someone is literally not moving, they're not going to utilize their blood sugar or the glucose in their blood the same way. And if they have less muscle, they're not going to store it as well. And so like all those things matter. So you can't take the diet out of the context of the person.
Okay. And then someone is going through the process of being pre-diabetic, and you're creating that shift in the food choices they're choosing and that whole play. Taking a step back, what is the cause of insulin resistance primarily? How do you, like, I'm in your practice and in general, everyone's like, well, I want to cure it.
The insulin resistance?
Yeah. So
yeah.
How does that break down?
Well, I mean, the cause of insulin resistance, I still think, is being researched. Like there is a lot of different mechanisms that is involved in that, but to have like one reason, we don't. But I still think it simply comes down to your lifestyle choices, and people don't necessarily want to hear that. And so I don't know if that's like the direction you were going.
Well, because one of the angles for me is like, this goes back to the carnivore keto community always does this, and actually, it's the same concept, but it's not. I hear this misinformation on social media all the time, which is 80% of people who are overweight have insulin resistance. So then people are getting marketed the feel great system and all this kind of stuff, portraying that if you fix your insulin resistance, you'll lose weight. And like, it's funny because like, it's crazy. Okay, as we kind of break this down, it's crazy to me, like we were just talking before this episode, carbs in particular just get associated with weight. Always. Like, and there's some, because again, it's the fat insulin model, it's all this kind of stuff that's just not true. But it's like, so 80% of people who are considerably overweight have insulin resistance, but 20% don't, which I know we've had these conversations, like genetic outliers, like when you get these people who are 400 pounds.
Don't count on it, people.
But from everything I've looked into across the board, and this is why like your keto people, your low carb people, your vegans, your intermittent fasters, your pretty much every fad diet under the sun claims they help with insulin resistance. They all do. Well, it helps lower your blood sugar and helps insulin resistance. Well, the first question I have for context is, did these people doing this diet lose weight? Yes. Well, crazy enough, it's pretty consistent. So everyone knows, about every 10% of body weight you lose, your insulin resistance gets better, your blood sugar regulation gets better, blood pressure, like everything. And so it's like, as you're kind of breaking that all down, if you're struggling with that, like that's one of the first things that I've always kind of portrayed to people, is like, hey, your insulin resistance, you're pre-diabetic, let's weight management. It's one of the first things. And it's tough because it's like, gosh, we're going on a tangent, but like, it's so tough because in a future episode, we're going to talk about weight sigma, and we're going to talk about how that kind of plays into it. But the reality is 100 million Americans are clinically obese, and the weight is causing so many things, from the high blood pressure to the cortisol, to cholesterol problems, to everything under the sun. And if you just focused on that 10% of weight loss, not crazy, just 10%, how much of insulin resistance, how much of these things just get better.
Yeah. Instead of focusing on the carbs and
it's the carbs.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter. If you do low carb, if you do low fat, it doesn't,
Here's
at that point.
Question for you. When you were losing your weight, how high was your A1C?
Never got that high.
It didn't?
No.
Okay.
I was pre-diabetic, but I was never full blown.
Okay, so you were pre-diabetic.
I was pre-diabetic.
So what are you, like 5.9?
I have no idea.
You don't know?
Because that was freaking 13 years ago.
I was just wondering, from like, obviously you don't remember your own personal experience, but when you've worked with clients, do you follow their blood work with them?
Yeah. I force them to go to doctors. They don't like that. But
and like, have you seen that decrease in, say, their A1C?
100%.
Like, how quickly do you notice that?
Pretty quickly on most, but actually I had a client. I had a client of mine who actually, her A1C creeped back up, and it was super fascinating.
After she had lost weight?
Yeah, it was super interesting. And then come to find out, carbs, this actually works out perfectly. She lost about 100 pounds and then stagnated on weight. All this is kind of weird. She had actually had weight loss surgery and on medications, and she was working with me. And she hit this plateau. Her A1C went up by like, I mean, again, it was 0.4.
But
it wasn't
it was
crazy.
Still just the wrong direction.
It's weird.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, all right, let's unpack this. And I was like, okay, hey, I'm not here to accuse you of anything, but the only way we figure this out is you get real honest and like, let's just talk this out. Is there a food change? Like, walk me through it. Like, walk me through a day. And she was like, well, I cut out coffee for a while, and I'm like, I was not aware of that. Okay, why did you do that? Well, cortisol, this, and I'm like, okay, whatever. No, it's not true, but fine, whatever. I'm not going to fight that. And then she's like, well, I started going to Starbucks again. And I'm like, okay, onto something. What are you getting at Starbucks? And she's like, well, I'm getting like not a Frappuccino, but one of the coffee drinks with like 2 pumps of this, 2 pumps of that, and with this whatever in it. And I'm like, all right, let's figure this out. I don't go to Starbucks, and so let's figure this out. So I pulled out a macro tracker, and I was like, tell me what you get, and I put it in. She was drinking 80 grams of sugar in these friggin' drinks, and she was doing it once or twice a day. And I'm like, well, there you go.
Yep.
Like 80 grams of straight sugar. And so finally I was like, hey, learning curve, we all make mistakes. I told her, I was like, to be honest, the artificial, I don't care. Like, I'm not worried about it. So if you want to pump with the synthetic sugars, I'm not worried about it. She adjusted, started losing weight again, and then I didn't ask about her A1C, but I'm going to guess it came back down.
And when this happened, she didn't gain weight? She was just
at plateau.
Okay.
Because her goal was to still lose weight, and she was just plateaued. And I'm like, she was telling me her calories, she was telling me, and her protein was at, and I'm like, something's not adding
I think that's a great example, too, of then why the quality of the carbs matter, too.
Yes.
Because, like, she wasn't gaining weight, you said.
No. Well,
but it was still affecting her metabolically.
Yes, because the sneaky part about carbs, especially simple carbs, is like again, let's just say it, sugar. Sugar is not inherently bad. The problem is when you and I I don't bake stuff. I started baking stuff with you.
It gets
and
real,
when you
doesn't it?
tell me, like, oh yeah, we're making these brownies, and you need to put in 117 grams of sugar.
Oh, it's more than that.
I know, and I'm taking this bag and I'm pouring it into a scale to weigh it. And I'm like,
don't make me keep going.
I don't like this. And so it's like, so yeah. And then all of a sudden you look at what you're eating, and you're like, there's 35 grams of sugar in that, and you're looking at it, you're like, I don't see it. And so that's where the simple carb play, and like people fearing sugars, and how, well, I just cut out simple sugars and I lost a bunch of weight. Well, yeah, because the average person is just hammering sugar through regular pop, through all the different treats. And like, that's where the demonization I understand for carbs and simple carbs comes into play. Because when people are sort of saying carbs, they're not saying sweet potato.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had a patient who, he came to me, he was pretty thin, like he didn't really have a weight problem, an older guy, and he had I got his A1C back, and it was like 11.2, which is really high. And I was like, what on earth are you doing? Like, so we talked about his nutrition, and he told me he was drinking 2 gallons of milk a day. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, and so he had no idea that there is sugar in milk. Like, that's just not something you, like, think about. And he was drinking, obviously, an exorbitant amount of milk. But I told him, you got to cut back on the milk. So he did. He was kind of grumpy about it and kind of walked out. But, and then he came back in 3 months, and we rechecked his A1C, and it was like 6.5 or something. Incredible change. And I was like, because when he was 11.2, I was like, you really should start a medication for that. That's the recommendation if it's above 10. And he would not start a medication. Absolutely not. And so when he came back and it was 6.5, I was like, what did you do? And he said, I cut out milk because you told me to. And I was like, you listened to me? I couldn't believe it. I didn't think he was listening to me whatsoever. But that was all he had to do. He didn't need to lose a lot of weight. He didn't need to make a massive change to his diet. There's just one thing that he was just drinking so much milk. That was it.
And then it actually works out really well because I remember hearing this from some like endocrinologist, and he made the comment, I understand why pharmaceuticals get a bad rap, especially when it comes to diabetes, because nothing comes even close to helping somebody like adjusting their nutrition. Like, I was on metformin by the time I was like 14, 15. The only pre-diabetes drug I was on metformin. But like, metformin didn't change anything. Like, it gives you weird poops, but that's about it. So like, most outside of now these GLP-1s, a lot of these, unless you're going to take like insulin to drive down blood sugar, the best way to help with blood sugar regulation is nutrition. The drugs don't do nearly what.
No, there's no drug I could have given that guy that would have dropped it like that.
No. And so, and that's why it's super important to know. But for context, for like, at least from the lens that I see, it's a tough one because since doctors only have 7 minutes and you're trying to articulate this and you can only say a simple thing, it goes into the whole idea of like, okay, how can I get this patient to make a shift that's simple enough? And that goes into what I actually want to go into next, which was like, why is it that certain people love just hyper restricting stuff? They feel it's safer that moderation is a thing. Just tell me to eliminate something. Like, tell me eliminate milk and I'll be good. Now, he didn't have to eliminate milk, and he was still a great comp. But what do you think on how that whole process is? Like, people just love that elimination mentality or the all or nothing. Why do you think people fall for that?
I mean, I don't know, but I would guess that people just have a hard, like, moderation is just a very difficult thing for people to do, right? Because there's a lot of nuance to moderation. Well, how much is too much or too little? But completely cutting something out is pretty black and white. And so it's an easy concept, right? It's an easier concept. That would be my guess. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because, like, this is why I'm a huge advocate of saying, like, hey, calories and protein, calories and protein, calories and protein. Keep it freaking simple so you can create into a lifestyle. And for a lot of people, that mantra around, well, I just eliminate carbs or I'm just eliminating this, it flips off a switch. But the problem is, and this is what you see constantly, is the binge cycles. Like, you eliminate cake or whatever. You haven't had, or my favorite is John Arpino. When we first started, like, linking up, and he was down 300 pounds for 4 or 5 years at this point. We were doing a podcast episode, and he told me he hadn't had a slice of pizza in 5 years. Now, he's an Italian New Yorker. Hadn't had a slice of pizza in 5 years. And now he is an extreme outlier of the sheer discipline that takes. Where most people, what happens, they hyper-restrict, whatever their fear is, whatever they think they need to, and then they binge. And then that binge leads a lot of people to shame. And that shame and that self-hatred turns people into going, screw it, this sucks, I'm not going to do this anymore, and I'm not good enough, I'm addicted to food, and they go down this whole rabbit hole. And that's why, like, short term, it's so sexy. Just eliminate sugar, eliminate this, eliminate that, and you lose a bunch of weight. You're right. But how are you going to sustain that for the next 30 years? And you create this constant binge cycle and restriction cycle over and over and over again. And it leads, short term, it's great. The hyper-restrictive model works. Long term, it doesn't work. It just leads people to these constant binge and purge cycles.
But do you think it always leads to binge and purge?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's where, like, I was saying John was an outlier.
Yeah.
Like, he got away with it. And there's people that can do it. It's just not realistic. And most importantly, it's not necessary. That's my angle.
Sure, and I agree. Like, do you think, though, if that works for somebody, is it fine? Or do you think it's okay?
100%. My angle, the way I always kind of portray it to people when it comes to hyper-restrictive models, if they want to go super low carb, as long as their blood work holds true, all that kind of stuff, because that's obviously still health. Oh, well, I lost a bunch of weight and I feel great. Well, what does the rest of your blood work say? Well, your cholesterol is 237, 300. Just because you feel great doesn't mean everything else is in check.
Because, like, if you're not eating carbs, you're eating something else.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. And so my angle is always, hey, if you like this and you enjoy it, and most importantly, from my angle is, if fear is not the primary driver of why you're doing what you're doing, meaning, are you eating the way you're eating because you're afraid of carbs, or are you eating the way you're eating because you just enjoy the process of the foods you're eating and the way you're doing it? And that's tough because you have to self-reflect and be like, where is this coming from? And oftentimes I would argue most people are doing it out of fear.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Not out of, like, well, this is the foods I like.
Right.
But again, it's like, if someone likes doing it and they're getting the results and they're healthy and happy, do you, boo-boo? All right, getting into the honest table here. We've been kind of floating around here because, again, like, this whole carb conversation, insulin resistance, it's way more context and nuance than it is hard science. That's the hard part about, like, this whole episode is, like, the science is simple. Prioritize fiber, control, like, limit your simple sugars and stuff like that because of controlling all that kind of stuff. Carbs don't make you fat. We're good. Like, that's it. That's all we got to say. Done. Episode done. But the problem is, there's so much myths. There's so much fear around it. Do you actually, going into, like, the roundtable discussion, do you think, and this is very interesting, do you think there's any merit behind fat insulin model? And, like, can you break down fat insulin model?
Not as well as you can.
Okay.
You've looked at it more than me.
Yeah. Well, so fat insulin model is all over the internet today, which is, Dr. Fung, Bickman, all these guys, and they portray, and this is where you got to be so careful on listening to people that lean on mechanisms. Because from my point of view, and this, my dad had to push me on this, because I used to have a very low carb mentality. I mean, I used to do extended fasting. It was all insulin driven. It was all this kind of stuff, autophagy, all these vogue words. I was caught in diet culture, people, for years. And the fat insulin model is this idea, and it fundamentally makes sense, which is insulin is your primary energy storing hormone. So like when sugars are high and when you have excess caloric calories around, it drives those nutrients into the tissues. So in theory, it totally makes sense. If you keep insulin low, it's going to help burn body fat because insulin is a fat storing hormone. But the problem is when you actually get into randomized control trials,
it doesn't show that.
And no, it doesn't. And it all falls apart. And so like it's so frustrating because it's still talked about to this day, and it's crazy to me too, because when you get into that world, these are very credentialed doctors. Like they're not Joe Blows, and they're still just saying nonsense. This is not true.
Why do you think they're still doing that?
Money and ego. Ego, it's really hard to say. I spent the last 10 years, 15 years doing research that isn't panning out. That's really hard to reflect on. It's like same thing when it comes to career paths. It's like, I've been doing this career path for 15 years. Wait, am I just going to pivot like that? How do you, like, that's just ego. And then number two, it's just money. Because don't kid yourself. Like I made that TikTok and social media post a couple days ago. This is going to sound really unempathetic, and I think it's super important to know I'm saying this because I actually give a shit. Like I actually care about people's general health and well-being, and people have these narrations in their head of what they think is true, and it's just not. And so when I say this, like, people love being sold fad diets, pills and potions, because it's way easier to blame the government, to blame doctors and pharmaceuticals and big food than it is to say, you know what, I'm just really inconsistent with my food choices and I live a sedentary lifestyle. And it's like, it's way easier to see this guy, see Bickman or see Fong or see one of these carnivore guys and go, yeah, you're right. US FDA and stuff, they want us fat for big pharma, and so it's definitely just the carbs. And guess what? Those guys do big speaking engagements, and they have courses, and they do seminars, and they have big viewership, because at the end of the day, people want it to be the carbs. They want it to be some specific thing.
Like an enemy that they can, that's it.
Yeah, because it's way easier for someone to wrap their head around, like blaming somebody else, than going, you're not eating enough fruits and vegetables, you're eating too many fatty things and deep fried things, you're eating too much sugar, and you're not cooking enough of your own meals, and you sit on the couch and watch Netflix for 4 hours.
Yes. I mean, the consistency, I think, is so huge, and people don't, either they're like trying to ignore it subconsciously, or they're just not aware of how important the consistency is. But that's what I see all the time is people will tell you, this is my nutrition, it's really great. And I'm like, well, how often are you actually doing that? And that, I think, is the problem.
Yeah. And then it goes back into all or none. And like this all or none mentality and this binge and purge cycle. And you and I both know people where, oh, I'm on track, so I'm just going to eat broccoli. And that's all they ate the whole day. And you're like, that's not what I'm saying to do. I'm saying eat whole foods, eat some lean proteins, eat variety, and even have a Danish. It's okay.
Yes. But don't have a Danish every day if you're trying. So and each person's different. I think that's what I think some people are angry because, like, I get patients like, well, my husband can eat whatever and he's losing weight. And I'm like, but you're not your husband. So stop comparing yourself to your husband and just be like, look at you, look at what you need. And your genetics and a lot of other things are going to play into this. So you can't just look at somebody else and think, I'm going to do it their way.
100%. Well, it's like food choices. That's why I'm not a very big fan of selling meal plans. Number one, it's actually illegal, by the way, people.
Not for dietitians.
Dietitians, it's legal. But for anyone who's not a dietitian or an MD, I'm assuming MDs can.
I don't know.
Because it's prescribing food.
It's a great question.
Gray. It's a little gray.
I'll have to look that up. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think so. There's a little gray there, but I just don't think it's sustainable because it's like you don't know this person's food choices, what they like to eat. And so you tell them these are the meals to eat at this point in time.
They're not learning anything.
They're not learning anything.
No.
And it's like, and you don't even know, oh, eat eggs. It's like the whole like, eggs, they're like a multivitamin. And it's like, yeah, eggs, the morality of food. This idea of morality of food, like good for you, bad for you. Like there's more nutritious, there's less nutritious. And then when you break into every food, it's like when people say eat liver because it has all these vitamins and minerals in it. That is one way to get your vitamins and minerals. Or
it's a very dense source of it.
But you can do it in a whole different food choice, like vitamin A, wherever you want to get it. You don't have to. You can get it from liver. Actually, you can get liver toxicity. You can get toxicity from vitamin A from liver. But like that whole bit, like you don't have to moralize food in this superiority complex and fear around this whole subject. And so it's funny. This whole conversation is about carbs and insulin resistance, but it turns into basically diet culture, fearing food, and like this whole stigma around how you should effectively diet.
Yeah. Because I truly think that's where the whole conversation starts. I really think that's why we even talk about it. I don't think, there are people that are worried about insulin resistance and getting diabetes, but I don't think that's the majority of the people's concern when they're talking about carbs. At least that's what I see. So it's interesting. I met a trainer who was like, oh, if you want body composition changes and he was specifically talking to women, I don't know why, but if you want body composition changes, you want to look better, you got to eat less than 50 grams of carbs a day. If you do that, it's going to change how you look. It's going to be magic. And I'm like,
the middle-aged man
well, he's a middle-aged man. I didn't ask him about his knowledge of the clinical research.
He hasn't read the clinical research.
I know. But it's like stuff like that people are just told like, oh, if you just do this, is going to get you your results.
Yep. And that goes into when we talk about values and focus and the roundtable and this whole world, clickbaity type stuff. Everyone wants to hear the most assertive, confident person. But in reality, science is like,
it's not that black
do
and
you guys
white.
Notice that Vitals is like 5 minutes, and then like everything else is, most of what we're talking about is nuance. Because that's the reality.
Yep.
And so there's not a lot we can be like, this is exactly how it is. And there's a lot like, let's go into context and nuance. But everyone loves the person who sounds the most certain, people assume knows the most information. But usually the people that actually sound the most uncertain, meaning, well, that depends, here's some context, well, this is what we know so far. People who speak in that type of language are usually the most intelligent and knowledgeable on the subject because they leave gaps for where the science is going or where it's been and what's had, like, but no, 50 carbs, this is what you do. It's like, just making it up. They're just made up.
No, it was, and I think people focus too much too on what they're not eating. It's always like, what are we going to cut out? What are we going to stop doing? But let's focus on what we can eat. Let's focus on all the things that we can eat to be healthy. And I think people lose sight of that in this culture of restriction and cutting things out. And like, there are so many amazing, delicious whole foods and meats and vegetables and different things that are so good for us. Let's focus on that.
That's actually one of the first things I do with a client.
Do you really?
Like literally my first thing outside of obviously like a step goal and a calorie goal, I'm like, we're not going to talk about eliminating anything. I just want you to protein goal. And usually the average person I've ever dealt with eats less than 100 grams of protein a day, 110. And then you get them up to 0.1, right around 0.7 to 1 gram per pound in lean body mass and like goal body weight. So like you take like a 350 pound dude and have him eat 200 grams of protein. The amount of people that'll be like, David, I'm having a hard time hitting my calorie goal because I'm hitting this protein goal. It's like, see the difference? And that's where, yeah, if you're going to lean towards anything, promoting certain behaviors so you can see the difference. And it just goes back to diet culture and carbs and this whole game. It's like, what is the primary rhetoric? Is it fear or is it promoting certain behaviors that you can actually sustain? And most of the internet is just full of, don't eat this. This is going to kill you. This is the one thing that's keeping you fat. And it hooks people because that's what people want to hear. It's not sexy to say, hey, just eat more fruits and vegetables. And if you want a piece of delicious carrot cake from Lara, like, it's okay. But just do it after you have your protein goal, you hit your fiber goal, and then if you have some calories left over, if you want to go over a little bit, it's fine.
And make it a treat. Don't make it a routine. That's what I would say.
I kind of want a routine.
I'd say, what's your favorite carb?
Favorite carb? Cheesecake.
Oh, yeah. I can believe that. What was it you want to do for your next birthday? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Cheesecake Factory, if you're watching, I want to eat every cheesecake for my 34th birthday in one day. So it's like 34 cheesecakes, and I think it's like 34. I think they have on the menu.
Oh, it's
so it works out
perfect.
Perfectly.
And how many calories?
And I think it's like, what did we say it was? It was like 30,000.
I think is what you said.
30,000 calories or 36,000 calories in one day.
Okay, so David thinks he can do
I can
this.
do it, no problem. This is why this is fundamentally why obesity has a genetic component, because I could, no question, do that. No question. I think a day is too much time. I think I'd do it in 4 hours.
Ooh, that's bold. So you think you're actually going to do this in August?
Contemplating.
Okay, to be determined. We shall see. Stay tuned.
And David now has insulin resistance and is diabetic.
All right, my favorite carb is bread. Bread, I could eat bread all day.
How?
With butter.
You're so lean, and every time we go out in public, everyone's always like, your arms are so amazing and you're so lean. How do you do it? Like, you eat bread? But bread makes you fat.
I eat everything. And strength training people, you don't get these arms without it. That's all I gotta say.
Curls for the girls.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else you want to cover?
Don't be afraid of carbs. Stop listening to diet culture, and everything will be fine.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to end it.
Totals.
Bye.